want to thank Kate Tucker, Vice President of Bendigo City Football Club, for reaching out and asking us to host something for clubs in relation to what is a volunteer function across Victorian football every weekend, a very important function that sets the standard of what we call game day, and helps monitor a standard of enjoyment that we should expect that all of our participants can have every weekend across Victorian football grounds. And of course, we know sometimes that standard's not met, and it takes a framework, and it takes roles, and it takes responsibility of volunteers to step in and manage those situations across our grounds. And of course, we have 40,000 football fixtures annually in Victoria, so there's a lot of opportunities for it to go right, and there's a lot of opportunities for it to go wrong, of course. So, Kate, I might just hand you over to you for a little intro from your point of view, and I know that'll resonate with a lot of club stakeholders that are on the call.
Thank you very much, everyone. Yes, I'm a member of the committee for Bendigo City Football Club, but I'm also just a mum of a junior player. And, I was very keen to see a session like this be held, basically because of my own personal experience this year and sort of watching other games at other clubs completely unrelated to my club, and seeing really what seemed to be a background of from time to time discomfort and agitation and anger that was really getting in the way of our enjoyment of the game. And in one case, I was directly involved, and whilst that particular incident was resolved, pretty successfully, it was pretty distressing for a lot of people. And what I realised in my own reflection was I just didn't know enough about what the powers and the role of the ground marshal really were, and as a senior committee member, how I needed to interact and what I could and couldn't do. So it was really from that place that I thought I needed to learn more. And then after that, witnessing other events or being told about other events this year made me realise that maybe it's not just me, maybe it's not just us, maybe this is a bigger problem. And of course it is, because we touch many different types of communities, and we know that we're all affected by a background of angst and anxiety around COVID, which may be contributing to it or maybe not. But there's no silver bullet with this issue. It's not just a matter for a club or a ground marshal or even FB's policies and handbooks. This is something we've got to work on together, I think. Conscious of how we role model this for our kids. I'm also conscious that I personally, and I'm pretty sure you don't, wake up on a Sunday morning and go, well, I'm off to deal with some agitated spectators today. Boy, this is something I'm really looking forward to. We're only mere mortals. It is a volunteer role, and we need to find a way to better understand how we can work together on this, I feel, for everyone's sake. So that's where this conversation comes from, at least from my perspective this evening. And now to hand back to Will and to David.
Thank you, Kate. And I think that sentiment is something that we all share across this community that is engaged tonight. It isn't just one team's responsibility to manage the culture on game day. Marshal requirements have an opposition team and a home team, and the requirement is for everybody to work together to provide the safest and most enjoyable experience that we can possibly have. Just before I hand over to David, I'll just let you all know, you can probably see some familiar faces on the call. Of course, Josh Kennedy hosting as our NPL manager. Can't see them at the moment, but we've got Brad and Steph from the NPL Competitions Administration team online as well. Nick Hatzoglu, who is our Head of Diversity and Inclusion, does some wonderful work across the multicultural aspects of our game, a space that we own and we should do way more to drive energy from, and that's something that Nick does on our behalf every weekend. So thanks for attending, Nick. We have a new head of referees, Tony Kurtz, online. Thanks also for attending, Tony, and whilst probably largely listening in tonight, if any questions come up, I'm sure Tony, who's got vast experience as both a referee and then in referee administration, post the main part of your career, that would be Tony, but a lot of Tony's background's from Northern England before coming to us from Football Tasmania. So welcome to Football Victoria, Tony, also. We've set aside an hour and a half for this session to 7:30. We'll make sure we stay on time. The way the session will run is we have David Carrington, who is a former General Counsel of Football Victoria, running us through the Ground Marshal presentation today. David and I expect that'll take around about a half hour of slides. And then it's pretty simple. We'll happy to open the floor to questions. And David and I also have a list of questions that Kate has already sent through, which I would anticipate would tick off probably the top 90% of questions that would come through on a matter like this regardless. So we'll jump into a couple of those questions. And then, as Josh said, if you could keep your settings to mute, and if you want to use the chat function to post questions, then Josh and the team and I can pick them up and answer them a little later on. I think we're recording this, Josh, is that right?
Yes, mate, that's correct, yep.
So we are recording this. Main purpose of recording this is we're happy to share this to other people that couldn't make it today, and also as a learning process for everyone here, that this type of engagement can help us all understand the matter better. Without further ado, I can see David Carrington online. Are you ready to go, David?
I am. I was just going to question whether you can see me or not. I've had some difficulties this evening. You can't see me. That might be a win for you all, but I'm having some camera difficulties, so my apologies in advance. I can take you through the slides with just audio if that's any use. I certainly think, yeah, you probably can live without seeing my face this evening. But yeah, my apologies for that. I'm not quite sure what the issue is there, but rest assured, if it fixes itself, you'll get to see me.
No, that's okay, David. We can hear you, no problem. I will share the slide deck now. Do you, and maybe you give just a short intro of your background with Football Victoria, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Will. And good evening, everybody. And again, my apologies for a couple of technical difficulties at the outset there. But yeah, just by way of my own background, as Will mentioned, I was General Counsel at Football Vic for around about 18 months until around about a year ago. And I can't see the invitee list at the moment, but I may well know some of you, but I doubt I know all of you. But so, look, thank you for taking the time this evening to listen to me around ground marshals. And I might just start off by saying that when I was at Football Vic until around about a year ago, I think what was a real driver for us in the game, and I think what more widely was a real focus for the game in general, was around driving respect. And you will all be aware of the respect campaigns that have been ongoing for a while now. And I think that's probably a neat way to start, because what ground marshals do is fundamentally about respect, in my view. And it's around ensuring that the game is respected and that we show respect to each other, and around about ensuring that that's uppermost in our minds when we're engaging as part of the football family. So I'll probably just start then, having said that, by if we can just turn over to slide 1, please. So thank you. And what we're going to talk about, as Will said, for the next 30 minutes or so, is broadly around 3 themes. The first is the role of the ground marshal. The second is how to select those ground marshals from the volunteer base that you have at your clubs. And the third is around duties of the marshals, and also then to run into some questions and a short case study around some issues that you might face when carrying out that role. Can I then just move into the next slide, please? Thank you. And again, starting off by mentioning a couple of key elements of what ground marshals do. I think it's self-evident, but it does bear repeating. Everyone's got that right to be safe when working or volunteering in sport. What ground marshals can do is to ensure that sport takes place in an environment that is safe for everybody that's taking part. And where that safety really is important, and why that's important other than for the obvious reasons, is that clubs have a legal obligation to provide a safe and healthy working environment for their employees, for volunteers, and at game day. So the role of the ground marshal can really form part of, and through the framework that we have in place, can really help clubs meet that legal obligation. Now, I would flag, as I mentioned, I was head of legal at FB, and I am a practicing lawyer, but please, I have to, I suppose, be clear that what I'm giving you tonight isn't legal advice. I have to put that out there first of all. What I'm talking around is in generality, so I need to just be a little bit careful there to ensure that my advice isn't taken as legal advice targeted at a particular club. But having said that, in generality, as I say, clubs do have legal obligations to provide that safe and healthy working environment, and ground marshals, along with other individuals, can help clubs meet that obligation. So we've done some thinking around and really distilled down what that role of a ground marshal is. And we've come up with a few different, I suppose, composite parts to the role. In terms of operationally, they're a club rep that coordinates the efficient completion of fixtures. A couple of things to mention there. One is that's all fixtures. So from seniors down to the under sevens, every fixture. They need marshals. Those marshals also need to be 18 or over. The role of the marshal can be quite challenging at times, and I'm sure there are people on the call who've worn the bib and have been faced with some of those challenges. And we think, or FE thinks, that it is more so a role that's suited to those that are 18 or over. We wouldn't feel comfortable having under 18s and kids put into that position because of some of the maturity that's required in the role and some of the, I suppose, the challenge that goes with it. It's there to support clubs, players, and then I suppose the whole family really of soccer, which is the parents, the coaches, the referees. They're there to provide that support during game day and really to sit as a, I suppose, as a function of ensuring that games are completed to a certain standard, and also that there is respect across the location and across the ground, and that essentially people act appropriately. By doing so, they help ensure that safe, welcoming, and respectful experience. We all want to go to the game and enjoy it. I don't know, I can't speak for everyone, but I've been at games where that hasn't been the case, and I've been really challenged, where I've seen some behaviour that has the potential to put me off the sport. You know, we need to continue to grow the sport. We need to continue to make it an environment where people feel comfortable and safe, and that's not going to happen where people are witnessing pretty average behaviour. And I think maybe I can call out an example of that. From when I first started at Football Vic, my first day, I was shown a video of an agitated person walking onto a pitch and striking a referee in the face in front of an under-8s game. And I've called this example out in a few different forums. But what was the most shocking about that was not the violence itself, but was, for me, I suppose, the look on the kids' faces having witnessed that. And I can't say for definite, but I have a strong hunch that a number of those kids won't be going back to the game because parents don't want their kids exposed to that. Now, that's an extreme example. More so, marshals can ensure and can help ensure safe, welcoming, and respectful experience around the grounds, not necessarily on the pitch, but around the grounds and what's said around the grounds. Now, I suppose that's a neat segue into the question of who can approach a referee. They're the only person that can approach referees. Ground marshals have that responsibility, and it is within the purview, I suppose, their ability to approach the referee, to inform them of behaviour that's inappropriate, and then the referee can make a decision based on that report. Now, at the bottom there, I've also included a reference to Chief Marshal. As we're talking this evening, we're talking around ground marshals in general. one development that we've looked at lately, and which we're encouraging clubs to consider, is the concept of a chief marshal, and that is, on any game day, you might have, pick a number, a range of fixtures happening at a particular location, and each of those fixtures will have ground marshals assigned to them. And in one sense, that could lead to quite a disparate, I suppose, approach and a range of different behaviours and a range of different boxes being ticked, let's say. The role of a chief marshal could be a role, as I say, a role that we're recommending clubs consider, whereby they sit as a congregate or a role that will bring together those marshals for the game day, and a role that will also ensure some consistency of approach. And where that would be the case is that we would consider asking chief marshals to fill out a tick box form that lists a number of key issues that present risk at a location. And as part of a revamped ground marshal handbook, we're going to include that form. And that is a form that is used across a number of other jurisdictions in Australia, and is a form that's been prepared by our insurer. And it really helps them understand that there's a minimum, I suppose, of health and safety checks that have occurred at a set of fixtures on game day. So you'll hear more about that in the future, but at the moment we're recommending clubs consider that, and we're also going to include that, as I say, in the revised handbook that we'll be publishing shortly. So there'll be more information around that in the near future, but it's certainly one that we'd like clubs to consider. So if we can...
I might just nip in there, David. It's Will. A lot of clubs will have that type of a role or that type of an individual down on game day, regardless. It might not be called a chief marshal, but there usually is some person that's managing the facility that is the go-to venue for all inquiries on a game day if you're at a venue where there's multiple games across multiple hours. So as David says, we'll formalise that role up as a recommended role as another layer of, I guess, management on game day across the grounds for 2022.
Thanks, Will. Appreciate that. And yeah, certainly understood that there'd be certainly people doing that role already. I think the capacity to retain some of that key information on each game day, fill out that form that the insurers have used widely across the country already, really provides more protection for clubs and more protection for players, such that health and safety is a more active consideration. So certainly, there'll be more to hear around that. If we could roll on to the next slide, please. I think we've probably alluded to this already, but marshals are not the only people, of course, who are there to ensure that safe, welcoming and respectful experience. It's everybody's duty and responsibility at game days to do so. And I think that's well understood, of course, across the board. And to support that, there are a number of codes of conduct that Football Victoria have published, and I've listed them there. We're actually revising the code of conduct that applies to ground marshals and incorporating that into the handbook that will be circulated shortly. But there's certainly a range of those codes of conduct that apply to everyone who attends game days. I don't propose to go into those in detail. They're published on the FV website, and you're, of course, open and encouraged to go and review those at your leisure. What I might do, though, is if we can go on to the next slide, is to talk a little bit about Football Australia's 11 standards of respect. So again, most on the call will know that these were a reasonably new series, or set rather, of standards that FA put out not too long ago now. I don't propose to run through them all, but I think it's worth just flagging those that I've highlighted in red, because they really underpin what we've spoken about so far. And firstly, they're respecting the referee's decision. And this is all about not calling into question integrity or belittling the referees. And I think, as we'll get to in a short while, that is often an issue that ground marshals face, where members of the crowd are probably overstepping that mark in terms of the criticism of referees. I think it's important, and it's incumbent on everyone in that football family to try and respect that referee's decision. We may not always agree with it, and often we don't, but that's okay. But what we can all do is respect that decision. The second, number 3 on the list of 11, but the second our flag in red there is around about safety and welfare being a priority. And I think that's partly why we're here tonight, but ensuring that there's a focus on health and safety of people at the game. And that's not just the players, but also those people in and around the game. Behaving appropriately there in red. Again, this really underpins a lot of what we've spoken about, and a lot of the codes of conduct that are FE's codes of conduct online, and also, and I'll speak about it shortly, but the GDT, or the Grievance and Disciplinary Tribunal bylaw, that speaks to what is and what is not appropriate behaviour on and off the pitch. And then finally, we hold each other to these standards in the same way that if I go to work, there's a set of standards that I must abide by in my home life. There's the ordinary accords of society that we abide by. And these standards expect us to abide by those and to hold each other to account at the ground when we see the type of behaviour that isn't appropriate. There's a bit of that. Others have called it the white line fever, but the rules of polite society still apply when we're at the football. And that's not always been historically the case, but certainly what we're encouraging and what we're committed to, and what the FA is clearly committed to, is holding each other to those standards and calling it when you see it. And that's part of the Marshal's role, is to call out that behaviour, what is regarded to be unacceptable, and to really walk the walk and call it out to the group. So that then begs the question: what type of person makes a good ground marshal? It's important to understand, I think, that not everybody has the skills that are required. It's a role that requires a certain level, and I'll go into these in a little bit of detail here, but well, maybe I'll start off by saying the way to understand who the right person is to do that ground marshal role is to really have a strong understanding of who's at your disposal, who are the volunteers that you work with, that you have at the club, that can, I suppose, that have certain skills that might suit them to being a ground marshal. Have a chat to people, speak to them, try and understand where they're coming from, get a sense of capability within the team, and then appoint those volunteers that are comfortable performing that role. Not everybody wants to do that, and that's okay. Other people will have skills that lend itself more easily to other roles. But Marshals, as I say, takes a specific skill set, and we've listed some of those there for you to consider, and I'll just call out a couple of them. The first, I think, is one of the most important: the ability to act empathetically, but particularly under pressure. These are pressure situations sometimes when marshals have to get involved in conversations with people who are maybe acting inappropriately. But key amongst that is the capacity to be a good listener as well. It's often very easy to roll into a situation where there is some inappropriate behaviour and just to try and lay down the law. And often as not, that won't work. You need to listen to a person, you need to understand where they're coming from, engage with them, but also have a strong understanding of what the rights and responsibilities are of everyone at that fixture. And again, be competent, but not aggressive in the behaviour. And be comfortable with conflict management. It's very easy to have these conversations and to go away and for it to actually impact you. It's perfectly normal for that to be the case. So it's about having that emotional intelligence and self-care awareness that you can deal with conflict management and then not take that home and stew about that. And then finally, also understanding the requirements of the game day coaching staff and technical area staff. It's key that ground marshals have that strong understanding because that breeds confidence as well. So can we go into the next slide, please?
I think the only one I'd add there, David, is the selecting the marshal is obviously vital. And to David's point, there may be people that are perfectly suited to it. There might be people that are better suited to being an assistant referee on game day. There might be people that are better on canteen management duty or bringing the snacks. So a lot of the best practice I've seen, a team manager will get the parental group together and essentially put them in the roles that they're comfortable with. So the game day marshal might be a pool of 5 of the parents that just rotate on a cycle 5 weekly, but never do the canteen role or never do the assistant referee role. Just like there might be a pool of 4 parents that are comfortable doing the assistant referee role and they cycle through that role but never do the marshal role or the canteen role. So some clubs do that and get a really good outcome from taking that approach rather than just listing all parents and then at random giving them a cycle of every job at some point throughout the season.
Yeah, thanks. Well, great point. I think you're right. It's for want of a better word, horses for courses. You know, some people will excel in that role, and if you find a great marshal, then by all means, you know, feel free to keep them in that role if they're comfortable with that for a period of time. And also feel free to introduce people to the role gently. You know, people can shadow marshals, see how they operate. You know, if you find a good marshal, they can be I suppose, a mentor to others in the group. You know, if they have that skill set. Because as I've mentioned, as we've said, it's, you know, there are elements of that that are not easy skills to learn. So, and that sometimes don't come naturally. So it's certainly, yeah, I think if you, certainly apply a lens to who you select in that role. So in terms of then, what are the actual duties of the ground marshal? And again, this will be covered in specific detail in the ground marshal handbook that gets released, but we've included them here for detail. I suppose the welcome, very important. Firstly, introduce yourself to the opposition team and be their point of contact and introduce others to those contacts as well. Introduce yourself to the referee, explain where everything is so that they know where they're going. And also make it clear to players and support that shouting negative comments isn't tolerated. And I suppose voicing criticism to players, we all know the type of behaviour that we're talking about here. And I think explaining that early during the welcome gives you a real platform to then go and stay true to that when, if and when you need to later on in the day. So again, I won't linger for too long on each of the duties individually, but certainly the welcome is critical. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. And then pre-match checks, again, we've included them here. There's differential checks for under 12s and upwards versus all. Couple just to, I suppose, mention there, obviously wearing a clearly identifiable bib and being visible and being there, I suppose, on time and before time, 15 minutes is critical. Safety checks, ensuring that 3 metre clearance from the pitch, and that's not just at the start of the game, but that's during the rest of the game as well, and I think I'll mention that in the next slide. But there have been a lot of serious injuries where that hasn't been the case over the years. And significant legal cases around it, not necessarily in soccer, but in other sports. And I think, yeah, it's critical that that 3 metre clearance is maintained because through the game, you can see how that might not happen. You know, kid comes along, parks his bike a metre away from the touchline, tackle comes in, and all of a sudden you're looking at a significant injury. So certainly important to keep that, to check that before the game, but also during as well. And I would only then mention the other point there on that slide is around at the bottom. It's also important that there is a committee member or the club MPIO that is contactable in the event that there is something that the marshal doesn't feel comfortable with. There might be situations where it needs to escalate, and we believe it necessary to always have that committee member or MPIO on call if necessary. That doesn't mean they have to be stood there in the ground with the ground marshal at all times, but certainly someone who's available to provide that support to the ground marshal if they feel that necessary. And I think that's been a consistent requirement for a number of years at FV. So I'd like, if we can go on to the next slide, please. During the match, again, I won't go through each of these in detail to leave plenty of time for questions at the end, but you'll see there keeping the exclusion zone 3 metres clear, as I've mentioned. Escorting the referee to and from the club rooms. Be mindful where that first aid facility is if it's not in the attack area. And I suppose, yeah, they're probably the key ones from my perspective. But of course, feel free to go away and have a look at each of these. We're happy to share these slides as well. So if we can go on to the next slide, please. So we've spoken a bit about respect. I think we can certainly talk a bit about discipline. My background at FV, as some of you would know, is in that discipline team. And what I would say is that, well, so the headline point there is responsibility to maintain control of spectators is with the club. If your supporters do something they shouldn't, the club is responsible for it. And marshals can help you, I suppose, limit the risk of your supporters doing something they shouldn't do and ending up with a charge of misconduct against them. And what I would say is, for no other reason than it's simply true, it's not a scare tactic, but some of the easiest and simplest cases that went through tribunal during my time was where there was simply spectators hurling abuse from the stands, because the referee's word on this is essentially final. The presumption sits with the referee, and it's for the club to reverse that. And the tribunal take a dim view of that type of behaviour, and will very quickly run those cases through and fine the club and or sanction the club and give them different penalties. So what the Grand Marshal can do is really limit the chance of that happening. And if a club has done everything they can do to limit the behaviour of that supporter, if they've asked them to leave, if they've sought further input from the team coach to ask them to leave, if they've spoken to the referee, if they've done all of those things, they stand in a much better position if and when they get to tribunal, if there is a complaint, than simply just allowing that to take place. So really, the marshal considers the eyes and ears of the club and really try and limit the chance of that kind of poor behaviour by one's own spectators impacting the club more seriously. We've also included there just a line around where marshals can be an active observer and where on the pitch they might sit. But what I did want to do then, having said that, was get through to a case study, and I realise I've been talking for a fair while now, and really open it up to the group just to get some feedback. And it's a very, I suppose, simple in one sense example, but one that we saw many times, which is, so one of your supporters, you're a marshal, one of your supporters is shouting racist abuse at a player. What steps should you take and how should you approach the situation? And I might throw that open to the group for some feedback. I'm sure there's a few of you out there who've done that role, so by all means, don't be shy.
We've certainly asked them to cease it.
Yeah, okay.
And asked them to leave on both accounts.
Okay. And how did you approach that person? What kind of manner did you approach them in?
We've learnt non-threatening manner tends to work easiest, and depending who's around them can. I think usually people around those sorts of people don't take it lightly, so it helps.
Okay, yeah, sure. And so did the person left, did they?
Yep, when it's an easy one where they look pretty silly, it is. Maybe some of my colleagues can talk more about senior matches where it probably gets a bit more difficult.
Yeah, sure. No, thank you. I appreciate that, and I think it's great if the person takes the hint, and as you say, it's really about asking them, and if they, well, I won't get ahead of myself, but certainly asking them to leave is certainly the right step in the first instance, and as you say, I suppose not as well assertive, but not, I suppose, combative language can really help. Were there any examples of where people have faced similar issues where they've had to escort someone from or ask them to leave, and if so, happy for them to share?
David, I'm happy to share. So something similar, and it's not been one of my supporters, but something where the opposition team was shouting out quite personal stuff about one of the players, saying, "Oh, look at your hair, like you need to get a haircut. Like I can't believe school would let you, do this kind of thing," or something along those lines. And I just sort of said, "Look, I think that's getting a little personal now and is unnecessary." And the people that were standing next to this individual turned around and actually agreed and said, "Yeah, let's just rein that in now." So I think just sort of explaining in that way as well, and hopefully then group mentality can make sense, and then rein them in.
Yeah, fantastic, and that's really reassuring in one sense that the group, I suppose, was with you on that. I wondered whether is there anyone out there who's got that experience where maybe that isn't the case, and where the group maybe, or there's more of a pack mentality. Is anyone willing to put their hands up and say they've seen that? I've certainly seen it at games. I've been close to it in major matches, and it's look. I get it's difficult. So yeah, keen if anybody's had that experience here as well.
David, if anybody wants to stick up a virtual hand as well, if they have a question, you can jump in, guys, or you can just obviously click that little button up the top and stick your hand up, and then David can obviously jump to you and you can have your say.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Sorry, I wasn't keeping an eye on the conversation then. I see, yeah, Michael Lingard said, ask them to stop. Absolutely. I think, and what we'll get onto in a minute is, I suppose, an escalation chain that people can use where that type of behaviour does occur. I think, and the reason that, well, I think what I would flag is that I suppose there's no right or wrong answer to this other than to say, as a ground marshal, because you have to, I suppose, assess each of these situations on their merits. And I'll get into this detail in a moment, but I suppose the right answer, for want of a better word, is that Football Victoria's bylaws have rules around racist abuse that are strictly enforced, and they sit within the Grievance and Disciplinary Tribunal bylaw. And in the event that you hear that type of abuse, if that person, well, it's always open to you to report that through to Football Victoria, and we will investigate, and we will potentially take that through the tribunal, remembering that the club remains responsible for that behaviour. But in terms of, and there's hefty penalties that are associated with that, but in terms of how you might approach it, again, it's each situation is dealt with on its merits, and I think there's a case-by-case assessment of that, mainly out of a safety perspective, because they can be unsafe situations that you're going into when that happens. So I might just roll on to the next slide. And actually, David has a question.
I guess, David, what I wanted to say was, I think most clubs will finding people to do this role is difficult because it is a confrontational role. It has the potential to be quite a confrontational type of role. I think, from my perspective, what a marshal can do, obviously we've touched on selecting the right person. Again, there aren't that many with all the skill sets that were listed for the right person to do that role. And remembering that they are volunteers, and asking someone to volunteer to put themselves in a confrontational position is not an easy thing. But in terms of suggestions, I would, from confronting a person who's been disruptive or abusive or racist, then I think that's where you engage the power on site at that time, and that's the referee. So you go over and approach the person, you explain the situation, what they're doing, and how they're impacting their club and what that could mean, and then engage the referee, where the referee has the power to stop the game, defer the game, or whatever, or even report that person if it's that serious. So that's where I would go with that kind of situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, what you've said there is absolutely the case. And I think is not dissimilar to what we've now got up in front of us here. So you've read my mind. It's certainly, I think the previous guidance spoke around ask, tell, expel, which is essentially asking the person to be, to stop, to tell them the potential ramifications of what might happen if they don't stop. And then if they don't stop, to expel. And we'll certainly develop that in the handbook that's to be released. What I've done here is to try and draw that out to an extent. And as I said there, to ask the person to stop. If it continues, you can involve the team coach to assist. The team coach has, I suppose, a level of authority that might be, I suppose, have a different outcome. And it might be that the team coach can then speak to the people responsible, or it can be potentially, depending on whether it's opposition fans or not. Sometimes team coaches can have conversations between themselves to seek to escalate a response to that behaviour. But if it continues, to ask the person to leave immediately. And what I've included there is around the importance of remaining calm, not to meet their anger with anger if there is anger on the table, and to clearly spell out that they risk abandonment of the game if they continue. And I think, again, if that person refuses, then the marshal would have the right and the duty to inform the referee the game is to be abandoned. And then it's around not engaging further, collecting equipment and exiting, and assisting the referee to exit as well. Now, after the event, what's important from FV's perspective is to report that misconduct, to let us know. It's FV's role to investigate that type of ill discipline and to investigate that type of behaviour and to sanction accordingly through the tribunal system. And as I mentioned earlier, the tribunal system does have some heavy penalties, and you'll all be aware of some of the sanctions that have been handed down in recent times and over the years to clubs and to individuals and to players who've been involved in this behaviour. The tribunal can hand down life bans. During my time, there was at least one life ban that was handed down to a spectator who was displaying some abhorrent behaviour. So we'd certainly request and strongly encourage clubs to report that kind of misconduct. And there's also, I suppose, an incident book within the club room where it can be located as well. And what we have called out there in the slide, that can be stressful. And you made a good point, David. It's it is and it can be a stressful role. I think if forearmed with the type of information that we're trying to give out at the moment, and also the framework that we're putting in place, that should limit the risk of it being as stressful. But it certainly can be stressful, and it certainly can be a challenging environment. And to that, I would say that if ever there is any time that a Ground Marshal feels that they're in physical danger, then by all means they need to call the police. They need to report it, and they need to keep themselves safe. That's the overriding, I suppose, focus here is people's safety. And if somebody doesn't feel safe, then by all means they need to call the police and let them know. What we have got in the guide that we're going to release is around some strategies around how to listen and how to remain calm in the face of that type of behaviour. And it's about active listening, it's about understanding, it's about empathy. And we'll certainly, I don't propose to go through them now because we want to leave plenty of time for questions, but there'll be information in the guide about some strategies about how Ground Marshals can deal with that type of confronting behaviour. Kate Tucker, you had a question.
So just a point of absolute clarification for me, the Ground Marshal actually is the person who has the power to stop a game.
No.
Doesn't have to wait for the referee, because look, it just says that in the fourth point there. If the person refuses, inform the referee that the game is to be immediately abandoned.
So the Ground Marshal doesn't have the power to abandon the game, but it's to inform the referee that the game, their recommendation is that it should be abandoned.
Yeah. Okay.
It's the referee who makes the final determination.
Good enough for me. Thank you.
Keen to hear some feedback and some questions that anybody might have. We do have a list that have been received of questions, and I'm happy to roll through those. But just opening the floor first of all for questions from the group.
We've got David with his hand up.
Oh, is that a new hand? Sorry. Yeah, David.
Yeah, I think this is greater than this forum and being specific to the Marshals. I think what the clubs, with the help of Football Victoria, specific material to get round to the clubs, it's part of a greater education of our parents, spectators, supporters, whatever you want to call them, but all the people involved and what the Marshal is responsible for. I don't think we as clubs, maybe I'm speaking for myself, have probably done enough in this respect in terms of getting on the front foot. And at the beginning of every year, like we have, I call them town hall meetings, where we run through the football program and all the codes of conduct and all that sort of things at the start of the year. And that's where we probably should be emphasising more on the expected behaviour of our spectators, supporters, officials, everybody, and what it means to breach those codes of conduct and how it can impact themselves, the players, their kids in most cases, what it does to them, and also how it directly impacts the clubs. I'm not sure that all our parents, spectators actually understand that their behaviour is how it has a broader impact than just simply themselves. And I think that's where we need to help this by doing a lot of pre-work at the start of every season, by briefing the spectators, or mainly parents with our and friends and siblings and whatever of our players. That's just a thought from me.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I'd certainly agree with that. And I think, and there's different ways that can be done. Obviously, as you say, at the start of the season, you can certainly put out comms to that effect. But one really simple mechanism that we call out in the handbook is around just having that code of conduct visible. Just having that at game day, whatever might be, I suppose, a bottleneck point for the club in terms of entry to a ground. And it's not always easy because, grounds can be open or reasonably closed in terms of entryways. But just having the code of conduct up there for people to see on the way in, I think is just a great reminder during the season of the what is deemed appropriate and what is the expected level of, I suppose, behaviour from parents and spectators. Absolutely.
Thanks, David. I can see Kate's got a digital hand up there as well.
I can't turn it off.
I think you just click it again, Kate. I'm not sure, actually.
Me.
Kevin?
Find that mute button. Yeah, good. Thank you very much for everybody for the performance. You said about the importance of having a committee member or member protection information officer on hand or available. If a committee member, I'm a secretary, but if a committee member is present at a ground and some behaviours getting a bit out of control, or the ground marshal looks like they're needing assistance, what does the committee person do? Where do they do? I guess, many of us on the call are probably committee members, and just trying to understand what we do to support the marshal.
I think, I suppose the answer to that really is twofold. The first part would be the responsibility really starts for committee members before the game day. So it's around ensuring that those systems that we recommend are in place and adhered to in terms of the framework of having the marshals in place and ensuring that they're doing what they should. And at that stage, I suppose that's the precursor bit. In terms of actually on the day, if there is an incident that commences, it's providing that I suppose support to the ground marshal. It's not that there's, I suppose, a pathway of decision making there, but it's really to provide that support if they feel comfortable to do so. Because committee members may not feel comfortable to do so. We would say NPIOs would probably the fact of the nature of the role that NPIOs carry out would lend themselves to that type of assisting in that type of incident. But of course, that's not always the case. But it's essentially, if committee members feel comfortable to do so, they can make a judgment call on a case-by-case basis and try and manage an outcome to the difficult situation they're faced with.
Yeah, I'd reiterate that, David and Kevin. The committee members' responsibility is obviously a little bit more strategic and macro to make sure that all FB requirements are set up and ready to go for the day. If you happen to be there and you happen to come across a situation that's unfolding and you feel comfortable to provide that support, then of course, I'm sure most committee members would provide guidance at that point if they felt comfortable. But really the committee members' requirement is to set it up to the laws of the game, the rules of comp, and to make sure the structure at the venue is capable of dealing with any situation that may come past it. So I think it's unreasonable to suggest that committee members are going to be at every game of football, at every venue for the whole season, right? So, but there will be times when you do find yourself in that situation and you may very well feel comfortable enough to support.
Thanks, Kevin. And thanks, Will. I was just going to pick up, actually, unless there's anything else on that point, I was just going to pick up on a comment that had come in through the chat, which is around regional Victoria. Many of the referees, and thanks to Ian White, many of the referees are very young and would not be confident in doing so. And I missed that earlier. I think that was probably a question around game abandonment or match abandonment. And I think that's right. I think there certainly will be some junior refs where this is a real challenge. And I think that's where the real value of I suppose, a competent marshal comes into play. It's providing some support to that referee as well, because you're right, it's difficult to ask a junior ref to grab the ball and walk off, and I suppose potentially face some of the flack that comes their way as a result. But in terms of providing that support, ensuring that we get refs that continue to want to come back at a junior level and upwards, this is part of that support network that they have. It's part of ensuring that they don't feel alone out there in the middle of the pitch. So there are, marshals there to help, and that's certainly, as I say, something that marshals can do to assist, particularly where there are young refs in play. And I think that's everything from the chat. So I'm just trying to see who else has got a hand up here.
We've got 3 there. You can make the call, David. DC.
I'll get an Avondale admin first.
I always forget that I've got a weird name. So my name's Sam anyway from Avondale. Obviously need to change my my login. Quick question to Will, I suppose, but anyone who wants to jump in here. And this is not going to impact probably a majority of the people in this course. My apology for asking quite a niche question. But at our MPL games, we need to have obviously ground marshals, but we also have security. So what is the difference between the two? Because I'm only sort of first year in the role, and no one sort of really knows the answer. And I know I've looked it up on your rules a couple of times to try and work out what is the difference between the two roles. So can you guys help me out as to what is the difference between organising security and organising ground marshals or game day marshals? Sorry.
Yeah, look, I think that just recognises that the standard you're talking at is at a senior standard at what we would call the aspirational or elite tier of football. And at that tier, there's obviously a greater focus of both crowd management and everything from those games are broadcast and streamed to obviously, some of those games, particularly on the men's side of it, have professionally contracted players. And I think there does come a point where we just recognise that to solely put that in the hands of volunteers to run the game day requirements is starting to get towards too much of an ask at that tier of football. There certainly have been times, and I'm not sure if Ez is on the call, but I know Ezel Hikmet, but I know Josh is on the calls where, particularly in the last year, where there's been, some crowd restrictions or even playing without crowds, where the team have relaxed the requirement on private security at those games. So it's more just an acknowledgement that the management of crowds at those levels are significantly different to what might happen at an under 14 or an under 15 game on the weekend.
So if our requirements are to have 6, that could be 6 security, and therefore we need 0 ground marshals because there's times where you do need both. It can depend on a range of factors, which includes the at-risk status of a football fixture. So, and there is an at-risk policy that we can send around as well that would let you know that. But as the risk grade gets a little higher, then there's both a change in private security and marshal requirements at the game, just to provide everybody with the best opportunity to make sure that game's a safe game and an enjoyable experience.
Good. I think Julia was the next hand up, please.
Hello, thank you. So I'm a parent, and I confess I'm not particularly well informed, and as I listen to this, I'm feeling less informed. What you don't know, you don't know. Could you clarify for me, please, the Marshal's responsibility with regard to my club's spectators versus the other club's spectators?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So essentially, both home and away clubs will have marshal requirements, and home marshals will be responsible for your own support, or for home supporters. So as a ground marshal, let's say for your club, you'd be responsible for the behaviour of, or for seeking to manage the behaviour of your supporters there at the ground. But of course, what we would say is that if you see other behaviour that's going on, then by all means raise that with your opposite number. Or if they're not willing to help, to raise that with the team coach as well. And eventually, if you see behaviour that is inappropriate, then a ground marshal can, from other fans, they can call that through to the referee as well. Sorry, they can approach the referee as well and flag that behaviour with them also. So essentially, it's about responsibility for your own fans, but of course, you're alive to the behaviour of other clubs' fans as well. And certainly, we'd hope that marshals can work together and I suppose cover the field, as it were.
And that was actually going to be my second question, was what is the expected interaction with the other marshals? So is that when you were giving your introduction, you were saying how important it is initially to go and introduce yourself to the opposition. So are you in particular aiming that at the other team's marshal?
I think if the opportunity presents itself, absolutely. I think it's certainly to whoever the representative that's, I suppose, put forward of the visiting team, whether that's the coach, whether that's the committee member, president, but certainly if the marshals are visible and they've got the bibs on already, by all means, introduce yourself. Certainly, I think that will help if there is any issue during the game. It's certainly easy to be able to have that rapport immediately and have that chat.
Thank you. That's great. Thanks.
No problems. Next question is David Svetkovsky.
Thanks, David. I guess this is more from a guidance perspective, because we're trying to work our way through this, especially heading into next year. At Preston this year, we've had the good fortune, and sometimes maybe we're not as fortunate, to have anything from 2,500 to 3,500 people coming, which primarily takes the committee's eye off, I guess, everything else, trying to run match day operations. And we have a match day operations manager, a chief marshal manager. I guess my question to you, or the guidance I'm looking for, is we need a pool of probably 10 to 20 marshals. When you look at the year for us, most games we would have 10 plus our juniors. Is it an official training program or something officially we can send our marshals on, or is this something we just have to translate what we've seen tonight internally to run it? Because it's something we want to do heading into next year, is to have our marshals properly trained. Why? It's risky for us with such a big crowd just to hand pick people, and we've got some good people without running them through a methodology.
Yeah, thanks for the question, David. And I think so. Certainly, there will be a revised guidebook that we'll be putting out, and that will certainly step readers through some strategies. So I think it's a kind of document you can pick up and present to the group. It's got some appendices in there around role requirements. So it's certainly one where you could pull those out, give them to people and say, look, you go and have a look at this. This is what I suppose a position description looks like for the role that you're interested in. And that really flags the kind of behaviours that I suppose work well for marshals. But it also lists kind of exhaustively, here's a checklist of everything you have to do on the day. So before the game, during the game, and then if there's an issue after the game as well. So I think it's been designed in that way such that clubs can pick it up and use it, and really use it as a kind of training manual themselves.
So I guess, and this might be to Will and Josh, this is primarily, we run this as our vehicle, Will and Josh, to train our guys. You guys don't foresee, maybe heading into next year where we can send people along, even if we have to chip in or something?
No, I do see that could be a way forward, David, absolutely. I think it's a real balance between how far you go to require volunteers to have the training, to take the time and do it in their own time.
Yep.
You don't want to turn people away from wanting to do the role, or even being able to do the role, but also give them enough guidance to be competent to do the role. And in community sport, we face this challenge quite a lot. We do. I mean, you're all at clubs, and you all know it's harder and harder to get people to volunteer to do anything at clubs in this day and age, let alone the marshal role, which is one of the most difficult. So one of the balances for us as an administrative body is how much requirement do you put around someone that's allowed to do that function? And as we've just touched on, somewhere between a volunteer and private security is the answer. But of course, the game can't afford private security at every venue and at every fixture, right? So it's about finding that balance. I think there's definite merit in throwing it up there for clubs that may be comfortable to, contribute to the cost of something that's a little bit more structured. And and I think we could look into even some co-funding of that, or even working out how that can be best done. I know your background's in sort of training and HR as well, David. So there's a lot of capability. Kate's background in that space as well. There's a lot of capability in our football community about putting those types of training.
Even
modules.
if it's just a 25-minute, scenario-based click box, and they finish it, and it says that they've finished it, it'd be a huge advantage to us, putting them in that position to say, "Hey guys, you've done it. At least done it."
Like on a learning management system or something like that, just to show that they have understood, as Kate was saying a little earlier, that, and Julia mentioned, that they have actually had a look at some of the codes of conducts. They have had a look at the requirement, and they've sort of worked through some of those scenarios. I think that's a really smart idea. Having said that, David, obviously you do, there is no doubt there's a heavier requirement on you and your volunteers on staging your game days. As thrilling as they are, and I've certainly been there with 3,000 people there, we certainly respect that your volunteer group have a higher load of trying to manage that 3,000 crowd on a Friday night at Connor Reserve than most venues across the ground, and we'll, I know the team will certainly continue to work with you on that.
Yeah. No, it's good, and maybe I might take it offline with you, Will, as in terms of what we might be able to come up with, because we need to do it. We can't go into next year, and Danny's on the call here, and I think we've got 4 or 5 of us in here, because it's just this is a week-to-week proposition for us, that if we don't get the right people in there, and I guess the second question, David, is where do the responsibilities of the marshals end? Because we can be conflicted, and we are all marshals ourselves. So every committee member are marshals. And I guess my question goes to, once we leave the ground, once a crowd or 2 crowds leave the ground, where do the marshals' responsibilities, I guess, start and end?
Yeah, so I think it's difficult, firstly, I would say, to, I suppose, provide a comprehensive fits-all kind of answer to that. It will depend on the situation. But my view would be that the game day experience has ended by that point. And once the last spectators are leaving, essentially the game day marshal's role is over. But I think, of course, there might be elements where the game day marshals may also have responsibility for pack-up and things like that. So from in terms of the game day marshal responsibility under, I suppose, the FV framework, it's probably slightly different to the legal responsibility that involves where someone's on a property and doing something. So we would say, I think, that the game day marshal role ends when everybody's left. Even though
left the ground or left the car park.
I think left.
Yeah, just to nip in here, David is David Carrington. That is not David Svetsovsky. I was at that ground for the victory game, David, and it does get difficult for volunteers when the away fans kind of disappeared out of the car park down the park, but still sort of hung around waiting for other fans to then come out of the ground and potential conflict there. And I think, David Carrington, am I right in saying, or I guess what the clubs would probably seek from you is the reiteration, I guess, that that they do everything they can within their powers and within the requirements of Football Victorian laws of the game that's reasonable to manage that situation. But I do remember that, David, in the end, the police got called regardless. And at the bottom of one of those slides was, if you just do feel unsafe and that you're not safe in that situation, then you know, that's an unfortunate moment to have to get to call the police into a venue. But that's again where the marshals and club officials will just need to make a judgment call on that. And they are difficult situations. You know, the car park was dark that night, and the group were trying to do the best they could. But I think that the appropriate call got made that night. And
yeah, thank you. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Will. And thanks, David. We had a question on the chat, which I might just flag before going to the next hand that's up, which is Ian White saying, with home games, we have to video the game. What is the role of this in regard to crowd behaviour if inappropriate behaviour is being observed? So what I might, I suppose there's two parts to that question. One is around videoing generally in public places, which is permitted. You may get lots of people who tell you that you can't video people or record people rather, but in a public place such as you know, in council parks and grounds where there's pitches being used, that is a public space, and there isn't a reasonable expectation of privacy from someone who's in and around that location. That said, and there's some nuance to that if you're in a private facility, of course. But that said, this question is more so around what to do really with that footage if you have it, and if there is inappropriate behaviour, and if that is recorded, that really is essentially evidence that could support a report that goes up to our fee. And we'd certainly encourage clubs to provide that evidence, both well, in support of any report that goes up. That can be a report from the club themselves, or anyone really can make a report, or it could absolutely support a referee's report that's coming as well. So we'd certainly encourage clubs where they have that information to share that with us, and we'll absolutely treat that with the, I suppose, we'll certainly go and consider that and consider whether that forms part of a charge that might be brought against the club whose, let's say, supporters are behaving in a certain way. So thank you, Ian, for that question. And I might just go to who has a hand up. Nicole, I think, is the next hand up.
Yeah, hi. Look, I just wanted to, I guess, go a bit further with David's question and perhaps identify that there possibly is two groups here. So one being the parents who have children playing junior NPL, who perhaps don't have, 50 to 100 parents at a game, as opposed to the seniors that might have $3,500, and what level of expertise and so on a marshal might require. Because starting to talk about security and controlling crowds and all that sort of stuff is probably quite a different scenario than most parent volunteers would expect to have when they take on that marshal role.
Sorry, I was just going to mention, I think maybe just calling out Will's comments earlier on that, which was around, yes, there are requirements for security for NPL clubs, because I suppose, as you've mentioned, of the higher crowd numbers, and I think that's certainly recognised that through those kind of security requirements, in addition to the ground marshal requirements. But yeah, I think when you're saying it's if there's less people in the ground or less people observing the game, I think obviously the chances of trouble are, as you would say, much lower. So not that we put I suppose a layering or a level of ground marshal responsibility. It's very much we have a set of recommendations that we have for people who want to perform that role, and we think that will stand them in good stead regardless. And then the NPL clubs are supposed to have an extra layer of support and comfort there through that security requirement.
Can I just make a comment then, as a parent that's been around for over 5 years? I don't think I've ever seen security at a ground at a junior NPL game. Are you saying there should be security guards at all junior NPL games?
No, I think I was more so just talking to the point around the differential between also NPL senior games where those security requirements are in place. But no, I'm not certainly making the comment that there should be security at junior NPL games. I think my understanding was that the comment was around the senior games that might get 3,000 to 3,500 people attending.
No, sorry. What I was saying is what we don't want to do is put the parents, volunteers off that are concerned, and there's assumption that there should be security and so on at those games.
Yeah, Nicole, that was the Avondale question that I responded to a bit earlier. There are tiers of football at the senior level that have private security, but there's no incidents that I'm aware of where there's been private security at junior football. And in general, today we're talking about exactly where you're coming from, which is parents performing a volunteer marshal role on game day, which has a level of what you might call community crowd management or behaviour management at a venue that is appropriate for community sport. And those roles happen across all sports, mainly at the junior levels, of course. So yeah, I hope that makes it a little clearer.
Sorry, Will, that's actually the point I was making, is just to make a point that there's a few different levels here that are participating in this, not necessarily all at a level where we're expecting thousands of people and security guards and all that sort of thing. That there's also the other end of the scale, I guess, where it is okay for parents to take on that role.
Yes, I agree. Point taken, Nicole.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Nicole, and certainly, I think the slides and hopefully the handbook will be helpful across all levels. We'd hope that they provide some guidance and some good food for thought across all levels of the sport. I'm mindful that I think that's the last of the hands up that we've got. We've got about 10 minutes left. So unless there are any further, what I'll do is start just to run through some of the questions that we received before this evening. So I don't think we'll have time for all of them, but I'll pick some that I think have the widest application. So I might just start with a question that we received, which was what constitutes inappropriate behaviour, particularly at the lower end? And I think it's a great question. I think there's a difficulty with trying to, of course, define what is inappropriate behaviour. I'm sure there's always somebody who'll do something we haven't thought of, frankly. But what we have done is through the codes of conduct that I mentioned earlier, is really set out a range of themes around the type of behaviour that we and that the football community expects at games. Alongside those codes of conduct, we also have as I mentioned earlier, grievance and disciplinary tribunal bylaw, which really calls out specific examples of the type of behaviour that's not allowed or that's not permitted, and that can be on the pitch and off the pitch as well. So types of chanting from the sidelines is called out in that, and there's a range of misconduct charges that can flow from some of that behaviour that's not necessarily on the pitch. So as I say, difficult to define that exhaustively, but what we've tried to do is certainly draw that out in the codes of conduct and then also through the GDT as well. Just looking down through some of these questions here. In the event a marshal is too fearful to intervene, do their powers to stop the game pass to the committee member, coaching staff who can step in to manage the situation? I think this is probably, or relevant to this answer really would be around some of the issues we spoke about earlier, which is, so firstly, the marshal does not have that responsibility or that capacity to call the game. But of course, we do recommend, and as we said earlier, that there is a committee member or MPIO available to support that person if they feel comfortable to do so. And I think it's not that the responsibility passes to, in any sense, the committee member, but more so support can be offered from that committee member, and maybe they can both approach the referee at that time if the marshal is feeling that they're afraid to intervene. That support function can be there. And what I would say as well, of course, by all means, if anybody has any questions as I'm rolling through these, please do put up a hand. I think Peter's actually just asked a question there. I think I just missed that. Is it ever acceptable to not have anyone in the role of marshal, i.e. COVID mandate, no spectators allowed at games? So what I would say is that the way that the state government rules around COVID spectators, or rather the spectators attending games during times of COVID, it's often that there are enough people are permitted at games to allow for the game to run. And in my view, that would include game marshals. So I think, and And of course, where there's no crowds, you're less likely, frankly, to have the need for marshals, which is great. But I think I'm not aware there's been a case where state government has, or through the directions, the Chief Health Officer has indicated that that wouldn't be permitted, the ground marshals couldn't be there. But happy to go and look into that, Will, unless you had a contrary view.
We've got Josh on the call. I think marshals have been designated as required officials on game day. So is that correct, Josh?
Yes, mate. Everyone who needs to facilitate that game day experience is allowed to be there, or previously in the previous restrictions when there was no crowds as well, and also during that as well, teams obviously in the top tier as well that did previously need security at those games. That rule has also been relaxed because of no crowds as well.
I wonder then whether I might just flag one more question that's come in, and this is just around reporting process. How does that reporting process work in terms of the club making a complaint to FV? So I think there would be some who've dealt with the discipline team here, which was my old team, but there is a report function on the website from memory, unless it's changed, discipline@footballvic. discipline@footballvictoria.com.au. But by all means, if there is an issue you want to report, that's the means to do it. So I think the remainder of the questions that we've had are broadly dealt with by what we've discussed so far. But so unless there's anything further, I might hand back to Will.
We've got Kate. Kate, I was about to hand to you, Kate, to wind it up anyway. So the floor's yours. But I'll tell you what. Do you want to ask your question first, and then I'll throw to you again.
Yeah, I've just come in triumphant at the end with the question. It is to do with a very rarefied case that we have, where we do have a lot more younger, less experienced reps in regional Vic, and just the general concern that we have for their well-being, because it does seem, I can't verify it, it does seem to us that because of their inexperience, they do cop more vitriol. We have seen more than we'd like to see of abuse directed to them and not being able to cope. So my question just would be, I've talked about this with Josh, question really is what kind of mentoring and welfare support is provided to the junior refs? Now, I know it's not strictly central to our topic today, but even if you can't answer it, I've just kind of logged it with you.
I can see Tony getting forward in his seat there. Tony, are you okay to take that one?
Yeah, I think it's only fair, Josh. Thanks, Will. So at the moment, when the referees are doing their course, they're mentored on their next 2 games. Now, obviously, our resources and my plans for the future, having just joined the organisation into sort of week 4 now, would be that we offer a lot more ongoing support than just their first 2 games. Obviously, I'm aware that there's a resourcing and sort of further planning to make that happen. But certainly my plan moving forward would be to offer a lot more support in their first year. Just to give sort of the people an understanding of where we're at currently, sort of 68% of our referees out there at the moment are in their first year, and about 90% of them never make it to year 3.
Sorry, Tony, keep going if you're still on.
No, it's fine. It just, I guess, from my point of view, is obviously we want to put resources and we want to put time and effort into mentoring and coaching and developing these officials. On average, you tend to find that you're getting a better result in year 5 and year 6. But at the moment in Victoria, a lot of these officials are never getting to that stage.
Yeah, and just add on top of that, Kate, as well, that as Tony pointed out, the referees are quite young. And if there are any incidents that have happened or anything that has been lodged with the tribunal or discipline that's been reported from the referee, then generally it's the practice from the referees team to follow up individually with those referees, depending on the situation as well, provide coaching on what's happened, not just for decisions on the pitch, but coaching and management of the situation as well. It obviously helps if the game's been videoed, which the majority of them are, to have footage of the situation, and then the referees team would reach out to that young referee, that male or female referee, provide some coaching on the spot over the telephone, and also, from a wellbeing point of view as well, checking on them for their wellbeing and offer any support further beyond that as well.
It's really good to hear. These young people are part of our community. We actually know the families they belong to, etc., etc. It's even closer to home. So it's great to hear that. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate, Josh, and Tony. I will throw to you now, Kate, and thank you for initiating this discussion tonight. When Kate and I first started talking about this around about 6 weeks ago, we weren't sure if we were just going to have the Bendigo City community online, or whether it'd go broader than that. And I think with over 50 people and all of our clubs largely supported here today, and the interaction that we've had, it just goes to show you just how important an initiative it's been, and how important these discussions are, and that we need to continue to have them, and that it doesn't just stop here. So thank you, Kate, for raising it, and I will throw to you to have a couple of comments before closing. It's only fair.
No, thank you all very much. I echo your sentiments that we didn't know who would come, and it's just important to have these discussions. I just think at a base level, we don't need to add to any more aggression that's going on in the world, or any more difficulties. And this game is a joy and should be kept to being a joy for all of us. So thanks a lot for coming and being here, everybody.
Thanks, Kate. I also want to say a big thank you to David Carrington for hosting. You can give digital claps on Teams, so I'll give you a digital clap, David, just there.
Oh, thank you, Will. That's very kind.
There you go, mate. No, really appreciate it. We've done a fair bit of work in behind the scenes to knock it into shape. So thank you for that. I really appreciate Kimon has been online the entire time as well, with that wonderful Matilda's photo with the Indigenous flag, holding the Indigenous flag from that first game. Kimon, would you like to say anything before we go?
Oh, thank you, Will, and thank you to one and all. We really appreciate the initiative taken to raise this with us and encourage us to pursue this, because it is a significant area. So thank you to Kate, in particular, David Carrington, thanks. And for all the questions, it's always rewarding for us to know that at the heart of the football community there is a deep commitment and interest in the welfare of the community and what happens on game day. And we all know in many cases that's a great challenge for us for different reasons at different clubs. And so thank you very much for helping us identify this and consolidate it into an active tool to help improve the situations out there. So thank you to everyone for your contributions and for your support. Well done to all. Thank you.
Thanks, Kimon. I think we'll leave it there. To our regional clubs, enjoy. If ever there's a time to know that tonight's training might be the last for a little while, or this game on the weekend, maybe your last for a little while. Just enjoy every minute of it. We are a little envious that you're playing in Metro Melbourne, but very thankful that you are. It's so important to your communities and to your kids. And to our Metro clubs, look, we've been through this. Hang in there. We know it's tough. Stay close to your communities. Football matters even more right now in these times. And this just lets us know that it's not only on the field, but it's off the field that we can touch our communities and support them through these times as well. If our team can be of any help through this period, please reach out. Josh, Brad, Steph, and the team have done a tremendous job making sure football's back on safely, and all of the COVID-safe protocols are communicated and adhered to. We've got Mandy and Megan and the team in behind the scenes doing a lot of work in that space as well. If we can be of any help, please reach out. Other than that, I think thank you for your time tonight, and stay safe, everyone. We'll be back around the football grounds in Metro Melbourne as soon as we possibly can be.